I never would have thought that an instrumental psych band that starts with the letters KHR would be one of rock's shining lights, but here we are. Hey, it's Matt O'Leary, and this is a review of the fifth album, SALA, by Houston trio Khruangbin, a Thai word meaning airplane. I've been following this band since their debut album from 2015, The Universe Smiled Upon You, which just instantly signaled their distinguished taste, first off through that album art, but more so in this refined blend of global sounds, Africa, Southeast Asia were very heavy in their sound. And all this world music acumen was grounded in the sounds of the dry Texas heat, which lends itself to that kind of desert rock adjacent sound. Very dry, crisp drums and minimal bass and this melodic, funky Stratocaster. Surf rock and funk and blues and psychedelia and soul. I don't feel like describing the sound really does it justice. You just have to go listen. I wouldn't necessarily call what they're doing unique. I think it's more like they've curated and packaged these global sounds for a modern and mostly Western audience. Kind of like an expert crate digging DJ, and I appreciate that curator role. I've discovered a lot of obscure music through these guys. They've been a gateway to stuff that I never would have heard otherwise. Subsequent albums saw the band expanding like a sponge even further across the globe to incorporate Middle Eastern sounds and these more accessible, danceable jams, and eventually a couple collaborations between the great soul singer Leon Bridges and more recently a singer from Mali, in 2022's Ollie. The new album, SALA, in Spanish, of course, means to the house. And this is a phrase that Laura, the bassist, used to say in her house growing up to gather everyone into the living room. It represents a homecoming for the band from their travels abroad, reaching larger and larger audiences, now pulling back to what got them started in the first place. And it really does sound like a sonic reset. The cover perfectly mirrors this idea with its very intimate, very internal view inside the house, but looking out the window at the horizon at what, might be the next chapter. And on the first track, 1553, we're greeted by the sound of crickets. They're really leaning into that criticism of being wallpaper funk. I think that's a little harsh. I see this more as minimalism that happens to be accessible and warm instead of cold and esoteric. It kind of reminds me of my favorite stuff from like a label like Windham Hill in the 80s, a mood for sure, but more than mood music. And this first track asserts that this is not going to be an experimental production of an album. It's a trio, and each component is heard loud and clear in the mix. Pastoral field recordings continue on the second track, May the 9th, where you get this natural ambience and some bird song that sits underneath a more structured composition. Some very soft but effective vocals sit beneath this beautiful chord change to the third interval in the bass and the seventh in the vocal line. It's a gorgeous chord there. 3 from 2 is another supremely warm and cozy track on the album, thanks in part to that very subtle organ that grows into the final third. These friendly bops contrast with the more sensual, the more dusty Ada Jean and Toda Via Viva. I love how Laura's bass just kind of falls like slightly on the back side of the beat, like it's just behind the beat a little bit and really gets the most oomph out of the most simple walking bass line. And don't even get me started on the drummer. Just go look at the YouTube comment section on their Tiny Desk performance, where there's been a pile-on of drummer jokes about him basically being Father Time and a human drum machine. Drummer adjusts half a beat every 5 millionth beat to compensate for the Earth's equinox tilt. I like this one. I heard the drummer got lost in the wilderness with no phone or watch, and when they found him 3 years later, he knew what second it was. The dude is in time. He is the very definition of a tasteful drummer. My favorite song by far on this album, besides May the 9th, is the infectious Hold Me Up, Thank You. That is a bass line that will just whisk your worries away. It is So friendly, so chipper, an absolute bop. The penultimate track, A Love International, is another real highlight for me. It starts with a very familiar groove. Laura's bass and Mark Spear's guitar playing complementary melodic lines as they usually do, going off on their own little tangents. The end of the song builds in intensity with every instrument raising the volume and getting slightly more aggressive. Not like aggressive, but relatively aggressive. And just as it's about to reach the peak, the song fades out into the ocean waves. This very dynamic and compositionally adventurous moment is an exception to a rule on this album of being more about atmosphere and emotional tone more than anything. I listen to a lot of music that's really about compositional adventure, prog rock, prog metal, rhythmic and harmonic complexity and risk taking like jazz or math rock or something. This album isn't playing any of those games. This is an album and a band, I think, that is really all about connecting people through the universality of a groove. It's about vibe, it's about aesthetic refinement. And if I judge by those standards, then I can't really find any fault with the record. The almost ambient transitional tracks, I think, do well to break up the listening experience of the album, to add flow and add a bridge between the more standard groove-based tracks. Some people might call them sleepy. I would call them soft and comforting. And I'm kind of partial to the theme of this album as well. I like any album that represents a homecoming and a recognition that coming home for a good meal, a good night's sleep is actually an aid to adventure and creativity. With that said, I do think that some of the melodies and the highlights on earlier albums, like the debut, like the second album, Con Todo El Mundo, reach higher heights and I think still maintained the atmosphere and the listenability of SALA. So for that reason, this album slots in around a 7, annoyingly mid. I get it, but I just can't go higher than that. I really respect what this band's doing, Khruangbin. They fill a unique gap in my record collection as well. But what do you think about Khruangbin? What do you think about this album? If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel and like this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching.